Darkness. It was everywhere. Ilya woke up, breathing heavily. Fear burned in his chest. He couldn't move. Tried to move his arms, but the boards, smooth, cold, they squeezed him from all sides. Panic swept over him in a wave. Where is he? What had happened? He tried to scream, but the ground drowned out his voice. The coffin. He was trapped in the coffin. Alive. Ilya began to claw frantically at the lid. His fingernails broke. His skin tore. Blood soaked into the wood. But the silence didn't answer. He didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes? Hours? Oxygen was running out. And suddenly, something rattled outside. Somewhere above, the ground began to move. Someone or something was digging its way toward him. Ilya held his breath. Salvation? But as the first load of earth crumbled onto his face, he heard a muffled whisper. You weren't supposed to wake up. A whisper. It wasn't human. Muffled, distorted, as if the voice came from the ground itself. Ilya froze, feeling his heart thudding in his chest. The earth continued to crumble inward, filling the coffin. It was sinking. Help, he wheezed, but his voice was too weak. Suddenly, there was a thud. A thud on the lid. One. Another. Ilya held his breath. Someone was digging his grave. Someone, or something. Splinters sprinkled inside. The coffin cracked. A bony, bent arm showed between the boards. Ilya screamed, but no one heard. The hand came through the gap, grabbing Ilya's face. Cold, dry, as if dead. Ilya thrashed around in the coffin, trying to break free, but the grip only grew stronger. The whisper was right next to his ear. You took someone else's place. Now you can't get out. Ilya didn't understand. He didn't remember how he'd gotten into that coffin. But as the hand dragged him into the darkness, consciousness flashed with vivid, fragmented images. A cemetery, a shovel. He dug himself. He put someone in the ground. And now, they've taken him. The world shattered. Darkness swallowed everything. Darkness. Ilya was drowning in the void. He was no more. But suddenly, muffled voices broke through the darkness. He's breathing. Shit, he's alive. A sharp intake of breath. Ilya opened his eyes. He wasn't in a coffin. Above him were the blurred silhouettes of men, shovels, excavated earth. A cemetery, night. Ilya had just been dug up. His heart pounded frantically. What happened? He whispered. Someone exhaled heavily. You were buried alive. Ilya didn't understand. He wanted to say something, but suddenly froze. Someone's bony hand was still holding his ankle from the ground and started to pull him back. The hand was pulling him down. Cold fingers dug into his skin. Ilya cried out, but no one around him saw it. Hey, hold on. It's okay. Someone grabbed him by the shoulders. No, it's not okay. It's got me. But the people stared blankly. They didn't hear. They didn't see. And the ground beneath him opened into a black hole. The whispers enveloped the mind again. You weren't supposed to come back. Ilya went down. The darkness engulfed him. The fall took forever. Ilya couldn't feel his body. Only the cold, the wet ground, and someone else's presence. He wasn't alone. All around, dozens of voices whispered in the darkness. One of us. One of us. Ilya opened his eyes. An endless pit unfolded before him. Thousands of mutilated bodies buried alive. They were moving. They were waiting. Ilya wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He wasn't breathing anymore. He was part of them now. The silence. The darkness around him became part of himself. Ilya didn't remember who he was. He was just waiting. Just like everyone else. Time didn't matter here. But one day, there was the clatter of a shovel. A figure stood over his grave. Alive, unsuspecting. Ilya felt hungry. He knew what to do. It was time to get out. Ilya felt his soul awaken. He was no longer part of the soulless darkness. Something inside him began to move. It was hunger. His body, deprived of breath and warmth, demanded food. But this food was different. He wasn't just the dead. He was someone who saw everything that happened to those who became part of this pit. The figure above his grave continued to dig. The shovel penetrated the ground with a metallic clinking sound, bringing him closer to freedom with each stroke. Ilya felt his consciousness merging with those who had been here before. All these souls, all these bodies, they had been waiting. Finally, the shovel met resistance. The figure stopped, and Ilya realized that now he had to act. He held out his hand, feeling his shadow stretch, becoming something more. He had become part of this world, part of its dark power. The darkness began to rise from the ground, taking the shape of his arms, his legs, his body. Only one desire tormented him to get out. The figure surrendered. Before it realized what was happening, it suddenly felt the weight of the dark essence on it, which was literally bursting out of the ground. Ilya stood up, growling, and looked at the man in front of him. The man was alive, but his eyes did not see him. He was no longer of this world. Ilya knew it was time. The figure staggered, its legs buckled, and it almost fell, but managed to grab the ground. Ilya felt the dark power seeping into her body as the darkness began to consume her. With each passing moment, the figure lost touch with reality, her breathing becoming more labored and her eyes filled with terror. She tried to resist, but she couldn't anymore. Ilya took a step toward her. His feet didn't touch the ground. He was more of a shadow than a living thing. He could feel her fear, her pain, and it was delicious, almost sweet. The voice in his head whispered again, "One of us." Those words, so familiar but completely misunderstood, awakened something dark inside. He reached his hand toward her face, and she clenched as if expecting a blow. But Ilya didn't want to kill her, not right away. He wanted something more: power, control. He wanted her to become part of this vast darkness, to make her soul part of his world. The man seemed to realize what had happened. He realized that he could not escape his fate, but when he looked at Ilya, his eyes were still full of despair. He breathed even faster, his chest pounding as if in a last rush of life. Ilya leaned over and whispered in his ear, "You know what to do." Suddenly his body grew denser. Ominous shadows clenched around the figure. She was unable to resist. Her body began to slowly transform, and her eyes dimmed, losing any spark of life. Ilya felt her soul fill him. He became stronger, and with it, more confident. He was no longer alone in this pit, no longer just part of the darkness. He was now its ruler, its master. The darkness had become his ally, not his enemy. But despite this power, there was a growing feeling inside him that it wasn't enough. He felt that something greater, still awaited him. Ilya knew this was only the beginning. The darkness around him was his ally, but it was still a mystery he had to solve. Something that had once been his remained within him, and he knew that this knowledge opened new horizons before him. The world he now found himself in was not just a void. It was more than that. It was a battlefield on which he could survive, but only if he could find the source of his power. Ilya gazed into the void, into this endless abyss, and felt its response. There were others like him here, those who had waited, those who were lost and forgotten. Their voices still whispered as they had at the beginning, but they sounded different now. He could hear in them not only fear and despair, but hatred, a thirst for revenge. He took a step forward, and his shadow spread across the ground like a liquid, consuming the space around him. He moved faster than ever. Every movement he made was smooth, almost imperceptible. The darkness, his new self, was becoming part of his consciousness, and now every step felt like something alive. Suddenly another figure appeared in front of him. This time it wasn't a human. It was a creature, dark and incorporeal. That seemed like darkness itself coming to life. Its eyes burned with a cold, ominous light. "You came here," it said in a voice that was both masculine and feminine and faceless at the same time. "You have become part of this world, but you don't realize that you are actually here." Ilya didn't answer, only clenched his fists. He knew that this voice was familiar to him, that it was not just a creature, but something much more powerful. This was his true enemy. "You did not choose the darkness," the creature continued. "The darkness chose you." Ilya felt that phrase awaken something ancient, long forgotten in him. He felt hungry again, but now he was hungry not only for life, but also for power. "I will not obey," Ilya replied, his voice sounding firm and calm. "I will rule." The creature grinned, but that grin was full of pity. "You are wrong. You no longer rule. You are already part of something greater, and now you will listen." Ilya looked up and met his eyes. In that moment, he realized this battle was just beginning. The creature moved towards Ilya, its dark, empty eyes glowing like the darkness of hell itself. Every step it took seemed to echo in the vast void, rolling and disappearing into the abyss. Ilya, unmoving, felt the power that lurked in his body yearning to manifest, but he knew he had to be careful. The creature wasn't just a shadow, it was what stood behind the darkness, its heart and mind. You don't understand. The creature continued, moving closer. The darkness doesn't just give you powers, it takes everything you love, everything you hold dear, and you will become part of it, forever. Ilya clenched his fists, feeling the darkness inside of him grow into something powerful, but he knew he couldn't let this creature manipulate him. He was no longer one to give in to fear. I am not afraid, he said firmly, not averting his gaze. I chose this path for myself. The creature paused, as if assessing his words. Its eyes glittered, and Ilya felt something inexpressible stirring in his chest, as if his body were filling with fire, cold and burning at the same time. It was a challenge. The creature accepted it, but there was an even greater threat in his voice. Do you think you control the darkness? It asked quietly, almost with concern. You're just its tool, and like all tools, you will break someday. Ilya realized it was trying to make him doubt. It wanted him to doubt his power, his choice, but his decision was made. He was ready to fight, ready even to lose everything if he had to. I won't break, Ilya replied, and his voice was now full of confidence and cold determination. I will become stronger. I will rule this world. The creature smiled. It was a smile devoid of joy. It took a step back, as if allowing Ilya to make the first move in their great battle. You don't understand, it whispered, disappearing into the shadows. Everything you want, you already have it. You are already part of the darkness, and it will never let you go. Ilya stood without moving until the sounds of the creature faded into the darkness. He knew this wasn't the end. It was only the first step, and if he wanted to survive in this world, if he wanted to truly become the man he dreamed of becoming, he would need to find even greater strength. But to do so, he would not only have to win, but he would have to understand what lurked in the heart of darkness. A new struggle began in his soul. The darkness whispered in his ear, promising everything he had ever dreamed of. But Ilya knew the price for that would be great. The darkness would take his soul, but he didn't let it completely consume him. At some point, when everything was ready, he would return to take control away from her. He moved forward, into the depths of this world, ready to find his path, a path of his own choosing. Ilya stepped forward, his consciousness filled with darkness, moving faster than his body. He was no longer the man he once was, but he wasn't quite the man they wanted him to be either. The darkness in his chest, in his heart, whispered in his ear, promising everything he had ever dreamed of. It offered power, strength, eternal life, but he knew the price for that was too high. The creature disappeared, and in the silence, in that vast space, Ilya felt his soul filled with peace. He had not defeated the darkness. He had become part of it, but he had not succumbed to it. He had gained power, but he had also gained understanding. Now, standing in the heart of darkness, Ilya knew that his journey was not over. It was not an end, but a beginning. He was free. It was only now, as he became part of what he had spent so long trying to defeat, that he realized that true power lay not in destroying, but in owning. Ilya, who had freed his soul, had fallen into eternal darkness, but now he was its ruler.